Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan, news correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal. Coming up this week.
Quite honestly, it can be a bit intimidating sometimes to go and confront the misinformation because in some ways it's like the facts don't count. Let's just paint a scary story. And what I think is somewhat sinister is I think a lot of these rejectors are deliberately targeting young, impressionable teenagers and scaring them.
The National Dairy Council takes on an anti-dairy campaign.
My brain's telling me I have two arms, but my body, physically, I have only one arm. And I realise that's my arm. And then the next thing, I put my hand up in the face because I can't see out of my right eye. And I realise not only I've lost the arm, I've lost the sight of the eye as well. And then the warning symbols came over the top of my head by the signs that my father told me earlier on, don't go near the PDU shaft.
And Embrace Farm held its first farm accident survivors conference. We hear from one man who lost his arm spreading slurry when he was 12. But first, many of you will know that today the Commissioner for Agriculture, Phil Hogan, was putting forward his proposals for the next Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP, budget. Given that the average EU farmer depends on CAP for almost 50% of their annual income, it was an important day. Last week, at the Irish Farmers Journal Dairy Day, our correspondent Amy Ford asked Commissioner Hogan what farmers could expect from the next budget.
The CAP communique is next week, and what can we expect from it for farming?
Well, I suppose this is the policy priorities that we will be setting out for the post-2020 position on agriculture, and it's obviously equally weighted. We have to take account of our sustainable development goals and our agreements that we've reached internationally in relation to climate and nutrition, and therefore we have to reflect that more in our policy. We have to look at new ways in which we can deliver the policy, which is more simple for the farmer and for the member state, and we will have proposals around that. And also we will be looking at what new measures we want to give options to member states to help young farmers to get into the business of agriculture. These are the major themes. There'll be obviously other themes as well.
Okay, and on direct payments, will there be more of a focus on farmers being more climate friendly, more environmentally friendly, and possibly more rollout of schemes then for member states to improve on that in order to get your direct payments? Yes,
well, farmers are the custodians of the environment. They know how important the environment is, but also the consumers now demand around the world from European Union farmers all sorts of traceability in relation to production and processing and the manner in which goods are produced as well. They're very interested in that. If they want to buy our products, we have to move to a higher level of environment and climate ambition, and this is what the policy will be saying.
You also mentioned in your speech here at Dairy Day that the amount of S&P that is in intervention stocks is going to have an effect on, if it's still, you can't have 500,000 tonne of S&P in intervention if you want to negotiate for us for the next budget in CAP. What else could we possibly be worried about from a farming side of thing that's just there instead of S&P?
Well, I was the only buyer in the marketplace in 2016 in relation to buying product off the market in order to protect the market itself in terms of giving balance to demand and supply in the interest of giving a better price to the farmer. But it has to be sold at some stage. So we will be managing the skim milk powder sales over a period of time. But the last thing we want is more product into the storage, because if I go to an EU council meeting in next May or June and I'm looking for money, they'll say you cannot manage the money that you have or manage the market or the policy you have because you have such a large amount of product in storage, like we had in the past in terms of butter, in terms of wine lakes and all of that. So that will be seen as going back to the past and will not be sending a good signal towards the demand that I will be making to hold the budget as it is.
PJ O'Keefe was announced as the Macra Firma FBD Young Farmer of the Year last night. Our correspondent Darren Carty interviewed him moments after the announcement was made.
PJ, there's a lot of proud people in Canlan tonight. How does it feel?
Look, it's been a few minutes since I'm after winning and I'm still speechless. It's an honour to accept the prize on behalf of Calamacra and for Kilkenny. It's nice to have an All-Ireland coming home to Kilkenny this year. We mightn't have had the one we wanted. I'm speechless. It's an honour to accept this prize. It really is.
You said when you were accepting the prize that this is, I suppose, a recognition of not just yourself but a huge family effort. Maybe expand a small bit on that.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank my parents, John and Joan O'Keefe. I wouldn't be where I am today without their support and nurturing. From a very young age, we come from a family of 6, and every one of us would have been involved in the farm at different levels. But that was through the guidance and nurturing of our parents, who are top-class dairy farmers in their own right.
A huge change when you look at it, really. This, say you were a farmer with your parents for 10 years up to 2015, quarter of a strategy. I suppose the brakes were released in 2015, and really phenomenal figures. Maybe just explain where the figures were and where you are now.
Yeah, look, we were always milking 70, 80 cows up towards the lifting of quotas. I was very fortunate to learn from the best. My mother and father had won numerous milk quality awards over the last number of years prior. So yeah, look, my foundation or grounding in dairying came from them. So we decided in 2015 that as a farm we were going to move out of bull beef, 16-month bull beef, and move solely into dairying, which I suppose looks where everyone's love was on the farm, and it's very easy to do what you love. It becomes easy. So we moved on from our 70, 80 cows up to 200, and moved the following year after then up to 300, 320, and we are where we are today, milking 430 cows. That's where we are today.
And that's all been done. I suppose the land base has doubled as well, roughly around 100 hectares, gone to 195, 198 hectares. How, I suppose, maybe have you made the transition? Because that's a massive figure. It's not even a double, it's not a treble, it's gone further. How have you managed to keep everything in tow? Grassland, breeding, animal health?
Look, I won't say it's all been plain sailing, but there's been some lessons learned along the way. But it's been brilliant. It's exciting. There's no such thing as a quiet day. But I've been very lucky. I suppose number one, to have a really good family around me. Number two, I have some really good people involved working with and on the farm. So whether that be on a professional basis, whether that be my accountants, right down to whether it be nutritionalists, everyone, veterinary, back to the people working on farm. Everyone that's worked on the farm for the last number of years has bought into the policy of trying to grow this and do the best we can. And look, on any given day, that's all we're out there to do, is do the best we can and look after the cows and the land as best we can. And look, I suppose everything else has fallen into place. Yeah, there's been some challenges as regards milk price and stuff like that, but throughout this year, I suppose, look, there was a recovery in milk price, which made things easier to forecast for the rest of the year and to go forward. So yeah, look, all in all, as I said to you, it hasn't been plain sailing, but it's been exciting to say the least.
You mentioned one part there, and I suppose there is some shadows being cast on milk price. Is that something through your expansion that you've been keen to keep in tow and to try and insulate yourself going forward?
Yeah, look, I'm very fortunate to be in the Glanbia region. We supply Callan Co-op, which in turn has a milk supply agreement with Glanbia, but I'm very fortunate to be able to avail of fixed price milk. And I suppose, look, I have a certain level of borrowings through the growth in the business, and associated with that, to insulate myself, I had to avail of fixed milk, and it's been brilliant. It really has. It's that peace of mind that helps you sleep at night, because when I sit down to do forecasts for where we're going to be in the next 6 months or in the next year, I know, because I know my production, I know where the base price is at, I know I have a lot of bases covered before we even have a cow milked, and that's a tremendous peace of mind. You need it. The numbers are kind of gone too big to just hit and hope kind of.
Yeah, you're gone more so from the day-to-day, having to milk, having to worry about grassland management, budgeting. You're now managing a big business.
Yeah, look, I don't know if I call it a big business. I'm managing it. Yeah, look, I my favourite job out there on the farm, and I don't get to do it as much as I'd like, is milking the cows. It's getting out there to walk in the grassland. Sometimes, yeah, look, as the business has got bigger, you actually don't get to do those jobs you love, whether that be feeding calves, whatever it is. Like, it's a simple day-to-day basics. Like, where I'm happiest is at the back of a cow, milking in the morning or the evening. You leave me at that, I get into my own little world and I'm happy out. But yeah, look, I have grown a business over the last number of years that has to be a good firm eye kept on it, and keep an eye on the bottom line the whole time, because yeah, it's really important.
Final question, I suppose, milking 430 cows, work-life balance, that important here, and what do you do maybe to get away from the farm?
Yeah, look, it's hugely important to me. I suppose, look, some of us have addictive personalities, and I suppose I'm no different than anyone else. I'm possibly an adrenaline junkie. So yeah, look, I love doing what I'm doing as regards milking cows, and I've done that pretty much my limits. And I suppose, look, I said, look, instead of keeping pushing that boundary on that, I was going to go back to something I loved from a very young age, was running, cycling. So in the last couple of months, I've decided to go back full-time training for adventure racing, and that's brilliant. Like it literally gets me to switch off completely, no matter what's going on the farm. Once I'm up on the bike or if I'm out there on the road running, I'm completely switched off, and I actually come back and I'm better for it. You just need that bit of downtime. So whether that's going running, whether it's going playing cards, whether it's going down to the pub to meet the guys for a drink, yeah, look, we have to get ourselves out. Whether it's going to the local discussion group or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. Everyone's got different things. We just have to get out there and do it. It doesn't matter. If it doesn't make sense to Tom, Dick or Harry down the road, it doesn't matter once it makes sense to you. That's what it's all about.
Well, VJ, it's going to be an exciting year for you. It's a great achievement, and we look forward to touching base and seeing how you're going throughout the year.
Thanks very much, Darren. Appreciate that.
Jim Wolfe, CEO of Dairy Gold, here at the Carrigaline Mocker Ag Talk in Cork. Jim, you mentioned the deflating butter bubble on butter prices there this evening in tonight's talk. Can you just expand into that? Like, how sustainable is our butter prices as they currently are at the moment, and where is it going?
Well, I think what you have to look at is look at the recent history. So if you go back into March, April 16, which is a little along with 18 months ago, you were down at 2,600 euro a tonne for butter. And during the course of the following 12 months, 14 months, right up to August this year, when it hit 7,000 tonnes, or 7,000 euro a tonne at its peak, that in itself, is an extraordinary rise, and it's on its way back now. It's retreating because milk supplies are increasing across Europe. More butter is being made, and the balance in terms of supply-demand is evening out a little bit. So prices have come back down and are down under 5,000 euro a tonne right now. It's where it will level out at. There's no doubt that butter and butter fat, from a dairy perspective, is back in vogue, and it probably will reach a new level. What that level is at, I can't put a number on it at this point.
And on skim milk powder in intervention, the public intervention system, that's an overhang on the market at the moment, and Commissioner for Agriculture Phil Hogan said at Dairy Day last week in Punchestown that he can't go into budget talks for a stronger cap for farmers unless if that overhang is there, it won't do us any good, it won't do farmers any good. What should be done with that S&P to get it out of there, or is there anything that can be done?
Well, I think we have to look at the ageing of the stock in the first instance. There's 360,000 tonnes, 370,000 tonnes in intervention. The vast bulk of that went in from mid-15 to mid-16. There is probably 2/3 of it, about 260,000 tonnes that we would reckon at this point is either 17 or 18 months old or thereabouts. So from that point of view, it is very difficult to see that actually hitting the food chain from a human consumption point of view. It may or it may not, but the longer it goes on, the less likely. I think, the stock, it was probably at this maybe a lost opportunity that some of it wasn't moved at the peak months, maybe a little bit more. Having said that, the last thing we want to do now is, as we are now coming off the peak, is for anything for that stock to actually be fed out at this point in time. I really think from the Commission's point of view, they really need to look at and rethink the opportunity of going for tendering next year, because no matter what, the fact that there was a guarantee price under it, it certainly was the floor, and it was used in 15 and 16, and I think it's a risky business to go tampering with intervention base right now, and there are some proposals and there are some comments from the Commissioner about it, and that needs to be very carefully studied before it's embraced.
Now, I'm sure many of us will have heard about the labour shortage affecting the dairy industry, but Cormac Keeley, head of Meat Industry Ireland, says that there's also a shortage of staff available to work in meat processing plants. Our correspondent Tommy Moyles was also at the Carrigaline Machrona Firma conference in Cork and asked Cormac about the issue.
Cormac, you mentioned tonight that there's a labour issue beginning to occur within meat plants. Could you go into further detail on that?
Yeah, Tommy, I think right across the processing sector, there's a real pressure for plant managers in terms of getting labour, availability of people to work, right through from general operative level right through to skilled labour in the meat plants. I suppose what we're seeing is that the economy is now back more or less at full employment. There certainly has been significant development on the construction industry, and when that happens, that generally is a draw away of some of the people from working in our sector. So, every morning there's a real challenge for plant managers in actually getting the staff there, and it's a balance then between whether you have the staff to go after particular value-added production or increasingly complicated cutting specifications, or if you do that, do you sacrifice your throughput? So we have requested that government actually does make a limited quantity of permits available for labour to be brought into the country to alleviate the situation. I don't think it's something that's going to improve in the short term, so I think the government actually has to step up to the mark and reopen the permit system on a limited basis, a quota of permits required, so that we can make sure that the kind of growth that we were talking about here tonight can actually be acted upon.
In a short-term basis, is there anything that can be done, or what are the exact challenges that are happening on a day-to-day basis?
Well, every company is doing everything possible to retain staff. I mean, that's number one. You start with retention, and I think increasingly companies are working on all sorts of initiatives. And equally, I mean, right across the meat processing sector, you have seen movement on pay in line with what is happening in the general economy, allied with increased focus on training, upskilling, those kind of programs. So in the short term, those are the things we're working on. There's some, we did thankfully get some small number of permits in recent times for highly skilled deboners and knife people to work in the cutting plants. But really, at this stage now, we're down to the wire. We need to get some permits to bring labour in. The industry has demonstrated to the relevant government departments the work it has done on the live register with local welfare offices, in advertising both in Ireland and across the European Union for jobs. It has done all of those things. So we're now in a situation where there's an urgent need to get some labour into the country.
Stay tuned, because coming after this, shopping addiction in the run-up to Christmas, the National Dairy Day makes a stand against anti-dairy campaigners, and the importance of farm safety.
What is the future for your farm payment? In this week's Farmers' Journal, we carry an exclusive interview with Commissioner Hogan, who outlines what the future of CAP holds for Irish farmers. A Farmers' Journal analysis shows the suckler sector has lost €200 per cow in the past 10 years. Major fodder crisis rally is planned for the Northwest. And in Irish Country Living, have you a shopping addiction? We advise readers on the symptoms and when to seek help. Inside this week's Irish Farmers' Journal, on sale today.
Now, farming remains the most dangerous industry in Ireland, with an average of 13 deaths per 1,000 people, compared to just 2.5 deaths in other industries. Last weekend, the organisation Embrace Farm held the first Farm Accident Survivors Conference in Ireland. I spoke to William Sawyer, who lost his arm at the age of 12, spreading slurry.
So it was an Easter Monday, 1990, 16th of April, and my father that day, on the earlier part of the day, told me the do's and the don'ts once we got everything up and running. And one of the things was not to go near any moving parts, PDU shafts.
Is this your first time spreading slurry?
No, but that particular day, it always went through this rigmarole of farm safety type of thing. Just be careful.
But you were 12 years old, so you were aficionado almost of spreading slurry.
But then again, I was doing this every day. If I wasn't spreading slurry, I was spreading fertiliser. I was driving the tractor since I was 7, and that's what you done, born into it. So everything was going according to plan, and it came to 8:15 at night. My mother called us in for tea. So we were sitting around the table. My father was reading the Belfast Telegraph, which is a local paper, and he says, "That'll do you today." But I was very aware that just one load would finish the field, and it's always the case you want to get it finished and done and dusted so you can start something fresh in the morning. So the tractor up and running, PDU shaft running, tanker sucking the slurry up into the tank. And as I go out past the window after finishing my tea, which was just minutes later, and my mother called me back to put on my coat. So I went back and put on the coat, didn't bother zipping up the coat, and ran on out. And I realised that he had been sucking the slurry into the tanker for a long time, and I thought there's something badly wrong here. So at the front of the tanker, I thought I would do some investigating. And there's a little regulator at the front of the tanker, and it wasn't working to my pleasement. The vacuum pump wasn't circulating the oil correctly. So I thought I would do some alteration to it by a little regulator on top of the vacuum pump. And in doing so, the next thing I had this tugging sensation. And as quickly as you blink your eye, which is a second, the machine took me in the PTO shaft and flung me over the top of the drawbar and wheeled me down onto the ground with severe impact. I was looking in below the drawbar with one eye, and I thought I was dying at this stage because everything was starting to fade away. And I asked myself, lying in the muck, where am I going to? Where's my destination? What's happening here? And as I lay a while longer, I seemed to come back to my senses and realise I'm still in the same place. And I says, I must do something. So I crawled off the top of the PTO shaft in the drawbar, and I made my way to try and get up onto my feet. And in doing so, I looked down and I could see only socks on and a pair of underwear and nothing else. I was totally naked. And I look over to the right-hand side and I can see an arm lying. Now, my brain's telling me I have two arms, but my body, physically, I have only one arm. And I realise that's my arm. And then the next thing, I put my hand up to my face because I can't see out of my right eye. And I realised not only I've lost the arm, I've lost the sight of the eye as well. And then the warning symbols came over the top of my head by the signs that my father told me earlier on, don't go near the PTO shaft. I disobeyed him. It was my fault. And this was the consequences, and I was going to have to live with this.
So even then you felt like you'd let him down in some way?
Yeah, there was a guilt
factor. You were lying there and you could see your arm on the other side of you,
absolutely,
taken off from you, and you were thinking that.
And this is my fault. My father's warned me, and I've disobeyed him, and look at the mess I've left this whole situation in. So I walk over to the house fully conscious, no pain, no tears, and I walk up past the window that my sister's doing her studies in for A-levels, and she can see me passing the window, and she says, Daddy, William's come up the street with only one arm. He's sitting reading that same paper, and he frantically gets out of his chair and runs round to the front door and gets me into the car. So we make our way down to Galvin Hospital, about approximately a journey of 11 miles. But as I travel to the hospital, my father says, hold on to the wound tight to try and prevent any bleeding. And then he says, let go of the wound, and I did so. And I realised there was no blood coming out of the wound, and he says, William, he says, you're going to die short because he says you're bleeding inwardly, and he says you'll drown your own blood. But in the meantime, down the road about 5 miles, we met two ambulances coming. They're coming for me, and my sister rang 999 and said we had made our way to the hospital, and they got them stopped, and we got out of the car, and the first ambulance says, where's the arm? He says, we need the arm. He says, it's not about his arm, it's his life I'm concerned about. So he says, well, we'll send the other ambulance for the arm. But no distance down the road, they met my sister Jane coming in another car with the arm. And what she'd done is she went out and lifted her brother's arm up out of the muck and the slurry and brought it in and washed it in below a tap and got all the vegetables out of the freezer and set them down on top of a towel that I dried my hands on about 10 or 15, 20 minutes earlier. And she wrapped the arm and the vegetables out of the freezer to preserve it. And this is what you're to do if anything like this happens. So they got the other arm transferred into the ambulance and they made their way to Galvin Hospital. They put me to theatre, maybe 12 hours of surgery, tried to sew the arm on, wasn't possible because it wasn't a clean cut up at this end and the other end. My arm would have been 4 inches shorter, and they made the very wise decision, I think, today of leaving me with the arm off. I was transferred into intensive care for a week because the impact on the side of the head, they didn't want a clot to set in and they wanted to keep on monitoring. And after a week in intensive care, back into an ordinary ward. And 14 days, I was released from hospital again. Back home, fully healed. And 2 days later, back at the slurry.
And was it that thing as well that you thought you'd let your father down, so you wanted to keep helping him in some respect?
Yeah, well, I wanted to prove that I was hindered, but not defeated. And there would be that determination, stubbornness in me. That this isn't the end of it, this is just a chapter, it's closed but another chapter's opening, we'll have to do things differently, but we're not going to give up on it, and I'm going to prove myself here.
For people out there who might be listening, what advice would you give them? Because farm accidents happen, so how can we prevent them? Because there's still a very high amount of them happening.
All I'm saying to you is a common sense that you just need to step back from the situation and look at it and analyse it. And you might say, I haven't time to do that. But I'll tell you one thing, when you lie for a fortnight in hospital, you have a whole pile of time to think about it and how you would do things completely different then. So I'm saying them today, I'm not here to tell them how to suck eggs. I'm just here to tell you, take that extra 5 minutes and it can make all the difference of maybe spending 5 weeks, 10 weeks in hospital and then realising there's all the time in the world and how circumstances will change, not only for them but for life, through the result of a serious accident or maybe even a fatality, not there, an empty chair. So common sense has got to prevail here. Just give it that extra 5 minutes and it makes such a difference.
Now, are you looking for a completely natural plant-based milk? Well, Irish cows are fed outdoors on a diet of fresh green grass. This all sounds innocent enough, but this was the advertising campaign from the National Dairy Council that attracted over 100 complaints. I spoke to Zoe Kavanagh, the Chief Executive of the National Dairy Council, at the Irish Farmers' Journal Dairy Day in Kildare, and she defended the campaign and raised the issue of anti-dairy lobbyists.
There's been a lot of talk today, obviously we're at Dairy Day in Punchestown, about the vegan campaigns towards alternative beverages to milk, say, and we're wondering what farmers can do in the face of kind of aggressive vegan ad campaigns that have come to light.
You raise a great point. First of all, the vegan voice is a very small voice, and we must kind of keep perspective. In Ireland, we believe only 2% of the population is pursuing a vegan diet. But what we observe is that there are certain vegan members, not just in Ireland but abroad, who are organised on a very deliberate anti-dairy campaign. And I think what firstly we need to be confident about is we have a great story to tell, particularly around the Irish production system, which is based on grass, and the family farming model, which clearly demonstrates the highest of standards in terms of animal welfare and care for the environment. So we have a great story to tell, and we have a great assembly of troops to organise. And I think now what we need to do is assemble our troops to tell the Irish story over and over again. In the social channels, on the radio. So I think what we need to do across the farming organisations is identify people who are willing to be ambassadors and equip them with the facts. And we do have the facts. We've developed this Dairy A to Z app that has all the facts around the key areas that are in discussion in terms of animal welfare, care for the environment, nutritional benefits, health and safety. We are perhaps a little shy or a little complacent around telling the story, and my observation based on 2 weeks in a new campaign and observing the backlash from the rejectors' voice, they are very extreme, they're very noisy, but they're very small, and I think we need to drown them out by telling the great story we have over and over again. And I think we need to assemble particularly our millennial dairy cohort, either who are working on farm or in processors or part of organisations, equip them with the facts and effectively drown out that rejector voice with a positive story.
Because you mentioned millennial, and I think what a lot of farmers are upset by the most, and I'm a farmer, is that I see ad campaigns online, on Twitter, on Facebook, and it paints a picture of farming that I don't recognise from my own upbringing on a farm, and that's what upsets farmers the most. So this is what you're doing now, is you're launching a new campaign to tell the story of farming that farmers know, basically.
Yeah, I think we've been probably too slow to react to the stories that are floating around on the internet, and cowspiracy, scary dairy, a lot of imagery coming from markets that in no way reflect the practices in Ireland. And I think we need to stand up and account for ourselves because it's inaccurate, and quite honestly it can be a bit intimidating sometimes to go and confront the misinformation, because in some ways it's like the facts don't count. Let's just paint a scary story. And what I think is somewhat sinister is I think a lot of these rejectors are deliberately targeting young, impressionable teenagers and scaring them. And then those people don't know where to go to get the real information. And I think that's where we need to stand up and have our voice and tell the story, because I don't care about the rejectors. I'm not trying to market to them, but I am very mindful that there is an uneasy and uncertain dairy consumer out there that needs the reassurance and needs to be exposed to the wonderful stories we have to tell.
And finally, in the run-up to Christmas, we're all thinking about shopping. But are some of us thinking about it just a little bit too much? Our correspondent Thomas Hubert asked Margaret Hawkins of the Irish Country Living team how you can define a shopping addiction.
Hello, this is Thomas Hubert, news correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal. I'm joined by our health correspondent, Margaret Hawkins, and in this week's Irish Country Living, Margaret, you have an article about shopping and how it could become an addiction and actually create health problems. What are the definitions there? How do you define an addiction?
Well, most of us are used to liking going shopping to some degree, and that's all great. We all need to go shopping for some things that we need at times, but sometimes it kind of leans over into over shopping or spending more than you have really, or more than you can afford. And at that point, you know, it involves all sorts of anxiety and shame around it, and maybe hiding the odd shopping bag and things. So it can be a real problem for some people.
And it sounds like a lot of other addictions, like alcohol, for example. When you talk about hiding the shopping bags, it sounds like hiding the bottle nearly.
Yeah, it's very similar. It would be, I think what I was told by the counsellor I interviewed was that, you know, addiction needs secrecy. So there is secrecy involved with it. And we all know of people, you know, who maybe take too much alcohol and they're hiding the bottles, or food either, you know, hiding food, extra food and so on for themselves. But the shopping bags can be the same, and you know, we've all heard the jokes about, you know, I leave the shopping bags in the car so that I don't cause a row. If I bring them in, I'll bring them in later on, that sort of thing. But it's okay to a certain level, but it can get into a real problem.
So what are those levels, and how do you know you're actually reaching the stage when you are a shopping addict?
Yeah, she gave me some really good pointers, and you can read them in the article as well. But it was that you're thinking too much about it, basically. You're thinking about what you're going to buy, you're preparing for it all. You're even thinking about what credit cards or debit cards you're going to use. You're planning it, the whole process of planning.
On Friday last, the Ceres network of women in the agri-food industry held its first conference in Dublin. News correspondent Amy Ford was there, and she met Doreen Corrigan of the Munster cattle breeding.
Builds up like any addiction. You try to resist it, and then you get the urge, and it gets stronger and stronger, and you get more anxious. And then when you go to hit the shops and so on, and you do your shopping, you have a very kind of short-term release from that anxiety. And then, of course, you know, the panic hits you when you're coming back. You may have all the bags, you may never even open them, but you've realised you've spent in a way that you didn't intend to spend.
So if you are in this situation and it becomes an actual mental health issue, what can you do?
Well, the good news is, I suppose, that help is out there. Women, I know, may take a little while to present with this kind of a problem. That is, go to look for help. But there are addiction counsellors all over the country, and there's an association of addiction counsellors in Ireland, and there's a website for that. If you just look at that, you can find an addiction counsellor in your area. So there's always somebody out there to help. You don't necessarily have to go into a treatment centre or anything, that you could, you know, quietly get some help with it. But if it is becoming a problem and the bills aren't getting paid and it's leading to rows at home, it's really something that you should look at.
Okay, you have details on that, what kind of help is available and how to get in touch with counsellors in this week's Irish Country Living. Thank you, Margaret.
You're very welcome, thanks.
And that's it from this week's podcast. Stay tuned to the Irish Farmers Journal Twitter, Facebook and even Snapchat during the week for all the farm news. The sound engineer was Ferdia Looney, and I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday.